I am going to talk about an earthly question that's come up. Just recently, the American Heart Association has come out against coconut oil. How many people are aware of that? I have so many people ask me, what's going on? Okay. So tonight I'm going to talk about what's going on, because I think it's relevant, because it's on people's minds. So the first thing you need to know is coconut oil is really good for you. Like I said again, coconut oil is really good for you. Now, what is it good for? Well, it's good for a few things. One of the most amazing breakthroughs is it's been extremely helpful in treating Alzheimer's disease. What's that about? Well, coconut oil creates mid-chain fatty acids that convert to certain ketones in the liver, and they improve brain function and heart function by 25%. So what has happened in a significant amount of cases of Alzheimer's, which is what we're talking about for the moment, is that the brain gets insulin resistant and glucose can't get into the brain, main fuel of the brain. Interesting problem. So when we go to the ketone metabolism, which comes from coconut oil, in as early as 4 days, the brain begins to function better and people begin to move out of their Alzheimer's condition. That's impressive. Another reason why coconut oil is very good is that it has lauric acid. How many people know what lauric acid is? Okay, so lauric acid is antiparasitic, antifungal, and antiviral. That's a pretty good deal. So it has that quality. The research shows that it's very good. Coconut oil is very good for the thyroid. One of the reasons it's good for the thyroid is as a saturated fat, it doesn't oxidize. What the American Heart Association, contrary to the last 40 years of research, has come up with is saying that the polyunsaturated fatty acids are where you want to go, and you combine that, you'll get 30% less heart disease. There isn't really a lot of evidence for that, and I'll explain that in a moment, because we do need to understand how people come up with these statements. Okay? But the point is that the coconut oil is really, if you look it up, there's over 18 very good uses. I'm just talking about three main ones: brain function, anti-Alzheimer's disease, protection against heart function, heart attacks, and so forth. So how did we get into, I'm going to skip, but you'll get it in a second, the cholesterol scare? Anybody know? Was it before your time? So in 1953, Ansel Keys studied 22 different countries, and he found that in those 22, 6 who have a higher cholesterol had some degree increased heart disease. Now, what he did is he ignored the other 18. Now, that's not really good science, right? And if he had taken all 22, he would have seen that indeed, in the total picture, cholesterol does not cause heart disease. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But so, in other words, he played with the data. Now, since 1953, okay, at that point, 1950, 1960, early 1970s, there was a whole low fat is the diet you want, okay? Then research comes out, so that is starting to counter that. What is that? Well, one case where they did what we call combined studies, 21 different studies, 340,000 people, and they clearly showed there's no difference between a saturated fat of a 160 and 260 in terms of heart disease. Phrased in a different way, which is kind of really what they say, whether you're a low saturated fat or high saturated fat, really didn't make any difference in terms of heart disease outcome. That's a pretty important statement. That's 340,000 people, right? 21 studies. The AMA journal, the major AMA journal, in 2009 came out and included again, there is no relationship between your amount of saturated fat and really your cholesterol level, if it's between 160 and 260, relatively speaking, to heart disease. What they did say is trans fatty acids and a high carbohydrate diet were the most main dietary factors associated with heart disease. They didn't say saturated fats. Now that's a big study. That's 30 years, 40 years of data, and it includes kind of all the things we're talking about. Now, in terms of the cholesterol, which is what we're talking about, that people are concerned about, there in Norway is a study of about 52,000 people, and what they showed is women with a cholesterol of 270, oh my gosh, that sounds so high, they live 28% longer. So that's interesting, isn't it? 28% longer if you're 270 as compared to people with a cholesterol of 193 or less. That's quite a statement, okay? And the data just kept showing that, kept showing it. So what is very clear is that if your cholesterol is between 160 and 260, it has no impact on heart disease, okay? Now, low cholesterol is an issue. If your cholesterol is really below 160, you start to have increased amounts of depression and suicide. And so if you're at the 25 percentile, you're going to have a double rate amount of suicide and depression. But if you're really low, it's 6 times higher, suicide and depression. So we're starting again to see this very significant correlation in this kind of understanding of the dangers of low cholesterol. Now, actually I knew about that in medical school, although they didn't frame it that way. That was in the 60s before all this kind of came out. But we understood that if you had low cholesterol, you're less likely to have enough serotonin. Kind of that was what was going on. More research comes out, and I'm talking about cholesterol because what they're saying is animal fat, saturated fat, is dangerous. Okay? What I'm saying is no, it's not. So there are more studies that point to that in a variety of ways. So it doesn't really seem to be connected to heart disease unless you have a genetic problem. Okay, where your cholesterol's over 300, 360. Outside of that, don't worry about it. It's one of the major paranoid fears in America is your cholesterol. Don't worry about it. Okay, I'm kind of moving in a different angle. I've talked about the dangers of low cholesterol. Okay, I'll just mention that people who have higher cholesterol have higher cognitive abilities. What we see is that in the reverse, because we are talking about something very important. Are you doing high carbohydrate diet or higher fat and protein diet? So what we see is approximately after age of 70, people who are on a higher carbohydrate diet have 4 times more cognitive decline. That's not so good. Okay? Now, why am I mentioning it? Why is that even worth talking about? Well, it's worth talking about because the traditional vegan diet is about 70, they're recommending 70% carbohydrate. We do not recommend that here for all the reasons I just mentioned. Is that you're looking at more cognitive decline, more heart disease, and actually more diabetes. That's how I got into this, because I'm studying diabetes and I'm saying, well, we have a problem. High carbohydrate is going to activate more diabetes. Okay, that's like a no-brainer. So our diet, 25-35% complex carbohydrates, leafy green sprouts and things like that. That's safe. It's part of our program. Well, we got pretty good results. 61% of non-insulin dependent people in 3 weeks heal their diabetes, which means blood sugar less than 100. And 24% of insulin dependent heal their diabetes, which means no insulin, no other medications, and a blood sugar less than 100. And 86% of people are off their insulin, of the insulin dependent, and 97% of people are off all their diabetic medication. That's not too bad. We are not using a 70% carbohydrate diet, though. We're using 25 to 35%, and that's my point. That's why this is really an important issue here. It's not a small issue. What is the best diet for your health? And it definitely is going to be a lower carbohydrate diet. Now, a ketogenic diet, just for definition, is less than 100 grams of carbohydrate, and a pretty good ketogenic diet, stronger, is 50 grams of carbohydrate per day. You create a slight ketosis, which is very good for your heart, your brain, and to protect against seizures. Now, another thing coconut oil does, which is very important, is it helps the conversion of short-chain omega-3s to long-chain omega-3s. The usual conversion rate is 1 to 3%. Okay? With coconut oil, 1 tablespoon, not a whole lot, the conversion rate goes to 6 to 10%. So it's double to triple that amount. We need the long-chain omega-3s. They're important for brain development in our children. Now, I've seen women postpartum, been in postpartum depression for literally 10 years. What's happened is their babies pull out the DHA that are needed for brain development, and they stay deficient. In 3 to 5 weeks, I give them the DHA, plant-based, yellow algae-based DHA, and EPA, and the depression goes away. So the conversion of coconut oil, doubling or tripling the conversion of your short-chain omega-3 fatty acids, which you get with hemp seed, flax seed, you get it in walnuts, chia seed, it's a big deal. Okay, so there's another very important reason for coconut oil in terms of building up your long-chain omega-3s. So now we kind of have a picture. We're not worried about cholesterol. We're not worried about saturated fats, which we have in coconut oil, which may even raise your cholesterol. In fact, I use it to raise cholesterol in people. And we're worried about a low cholesterol or perhaps low saturated fat. So part of what we're seeing is this is a major shift in diet. Now, I want to go back for a second. As a result of the American Heart Association in the 1960s, 1970s, pushing for a high carbohydrate diet and a lower fat diet, really the quality of health is going down. Because people listen to these things. That's why I get so many calls. What's this with coconut oil? I get a lot of calls, and it's like, okay, people are listening. And what we got is increase in obesity and a decrease in quality of health. Why obesity? Because carbohydrates get deposited as fat in our cells. So that's where we are, a real problem with your health is in obesity, which is definitely increased, is carbohydrates convert to fat in your cells. Insulin converts the carbohydrate to triglycerides and so forth. I don't want to get too biochemical. That's not the point. So we're looking very seriously what's the optimum diet. That's what we're talking about. People have it on their minds, okay? And that optimum diet's between 25-45% complex carbohydrates, sprouts and things like that, 10 to 15% protein, and 25 to 45% fat, and even higher. Because the original diet was really fat. It was much higher. Sugar was not much available part of the diet. It just wasn't available. Okay. So for the diabetes, we've shifted it away from this high complex carbohydrate. Now, what they did to come out with this statement is they depended on 4 studies, all of which were, in a sense, blatantly defective, that were done in the 60s and early 70s. And that's how they come up with, the use of polyunsaturated fatty acids as a key, and not using coconut oil. Now, what's interesting is none of those 4 studies included any coconut oil. So how, based on 4 studies done in the 60s and early 70s, can they make a statement about coconut oil when in fact coconut oil wasn't even involved in the studies? That's kind of interesting. This is not high-level science, okay? And I'm just kind of joking, but that actually is a real problem. So you're making statements that affect everybody's health, and based on not even studying coconut oil. Now, there were some things about coconut oil, but it wasn't really the coconut oil we're talking about today. It was partially hydrogenated coconut oil, which is not virgin coconut oil. So people, even the biochemistry was mixed up. Now, there is a biochemistry part of it. What they see, what they're recommending, polyunsaturated fatty acids, are not very well absorbed into the system. They're not very well incorporated into the cell membrane. They interfere with the conversion of T3 to T4, as coconut oil does just the opposite, enhances the conversion of T3 to T4, which is why it's good for thyroid. And these PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids, I think I'm going to call it PUFAs for the moment, just because it's a funnier term, okay, actually act like toxins in the system because they're not incorporated appropriately. The mitochondria are energy factories in the cell. Can't really incorporate them very well. Okay, and so they end up getting deposited in our arteries and our liver. They're associated with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and so forth. So that doesn't happen with the mid-chain fatty acids that we get with coconut oil. So these PUFAs actually create a problem because they just the body can't really handle them, and it gets deposited in the system. So there's a lot mitigating against the use of these PUFAs, and making any kind of statement where you eliminate all the major studies, and there were some very major studies, the Women's Health Study, the Sydney Cardiovascular Study, I mean, huge studies with thousands of people. When I look at it, I add up to 1.25 million people that really say a higher complex carbohydrate and using PUFAs isn't so good. You need, and it doesn't matter about the amount of saturated fat, okay, whether it's lower or higher, okay. and if your cholesterol is between 160 and 260, there's no worry. So these major studies, they eliminated and basically picked these 4 studies that are pretty flawed, just to begin with, and don't even test the coconut oil. So we have a crisis of confidence, and I can't, I don't want to get into, well, who's paying them to do this, but we have to look at what this is about, because it's contrary to the scientific evidence. So I think if we just kind of go back to the regulars, coconut oil is good for you. It helps treat the Alzheimer's disease, as they said. It helps convert T4 to T3, so it improves thyroid function. It has the lauric acid, which is antifungal, antiparasitic, and antiviral and antibacteria. It generally is well metabolized in the system, and also helps convert the short chain omega-3s to long chain omega-3s. Now, we need the long chain omega-3s. The research suggests literally 75,000 people a year, 95,000 people a year, lives are saved by having a long chain omega-3s. Well, we need a long chain omega-3s for improved mental functioning. They increase also the neurotransmitters. I'm trying again not to get too technical, but they increase that. And so what we're looking at is that these long chain omega-3s are extremely important in protecting people's brain function and heart function, and we need that conversion. That's the main point I'm saying. Coconut oil helps it. So this recommendation, based on 4 studies done in the 60s, early 70s, which had big flaws, and eliminating all the major studies that have been done, like the Women's Health Study, is very, what we call cherry picking. So you can pick the right studies because life isn't so direct to make your point, which is what they did. So I go back again to making it clear, coconut oil is healthy for you, it's safe for you, and there's no need to be afraid of it and using it in your life. So may you be at peace with this in terms of that, and then you don't have to keep asking me the question about coconut oil just because they bring it up. You have, again, no idea how many people have emailed me, what's this with the coconut oil, okay? So I'm saying it partly for my own, time, space, but it's also really to educate you. And to educate you that just because an official association says something doesn't mean it's true. So you may be blessed with this wisdom. Amen.